Today marks a very special milestone for the Lazy Masquerade channel. Exactly 1 year ago today, I uploaded my first ever horror narration video. I was just a creepypasta and true horror story addict, and at that time, there weren't many of these types of horror story videos on YouTube. Wanting to try my hand at making my own series, I made my first video. Looking back, it's far from perfect, but when you compare it to the content I put out nowadays, I think you can definitely see, and more importantly hear, that my channel has evolved. Since those early days, we've built a community, and that's all down to you guys, the fans. This first year's been incredible, and whether you've been here since the beginning, or are one of the new members of the Lazy Legion, I'd just like to thank you for supporting me. Anyway, I know what you're thinking, enough of the blabber, so let's just get into the juicy stuff. Sadly, I've lost some of the early recordings I've done, but from what I could salvage, here are my top 15 favourite stories I've narrated so far. Enjoyed the video? Stay spooky. And remember, the best things happen in the dark. Why is it always the pretty ones? I met her on an open Facebook group, mainly consisting of people from my hometown. I chatted to people on the Facebook group every day. It was a really good way for me to relieve the stress built up daily from the long commute from my house to work, my shitty boss who complains about everything I do, and my work colleagues who only seem to be interested in the news headlines, football, and the secretary's arse. It was fun to just relax and talk to people about my hometown, movies, or whatever else I was interested in, without fear of being judged constantly. Visiting the site every day, it wasn't long until I started getting really friendly with the people in the group. We started talking more about our private lives, and there was discussion that we should meet up in real life. It was around then that a girl called May sent a request to join the group. I accepted the request, and soon after, a comment was up on the group page.
Hi! Nice to meet you all. I've never really used Facebook before, so I don't really know the rules. Hope we can all get along.
Even though this wasn't real life, it's always awkward for someone to join a new group of people that they don't know. In a world where so much human interaction takes place through words typed up on a screen, it's very easy to become isolated. So I decided to send her a message. Nice to meet you. Let's talk in private chat. As soon as I finished typing, her chat box popped up on my screen. I laughed a little and opened up the chat box.
Thank you so much for talking to me. I was really nervous. Wasn't sure anyone was going to talk to me. I'm so happy.
Whoa, she's pretty cute, I thought to myself. We introduced ourselves and talked about random things. Ended up talking to her past midnight. I know it's stupid, but I was kind of excited about talking to her. May was a 25-year-old office lady. She said she enjoyed her job, but that she tended to make mistakes, and her boss was always getting furious at her. Today, she'd mistakenly copied a file which she was supposed to shred, and was made into a laughingstock as her boss shouted at her at the top of his voice. I pictured the scene in my mind. I imagined May with her straight, long black hair, which extended just past her shoulders, and the boss screaming at her as she hung her head in shame in front of the printer. We both joked about the whole scenario, and I went to sleep in a good mood for a change. As usual at work, my boss was being a massive arsehole. He kept on setting me near impossible tasks, without an ounce of consideration for the time that it would take me. That's not to say my subordinates were any better. When I told them which duties to perform, they just sighed and didn't even look at me. God damn it, why is everyone trying to piss me off, I thought to myself. But in all honesty, I was getting along fine. Although my work colleagues pissed me off, it was no longer causing me any stress. Every day I got home, I would jump straight into the bath, open up a can of beer, and talk to my friends on Facebook. As long as I have this, I don't give two fucks what goes on at work. That probably sounds quite sad to the social butterflies amongst you, but it's how I felt. I started to feel like I had been talking to May an awful lot. I flicked through the chat history, and I saw that most of my comments were from chatting with her. There were a few messages sent to my family and my old friends from university, but that was about it. As I flicked through the chat history on the group though, I noticed that I was the only one talking to May. Nobody else replied to any of her comments, and nobody liked the things that she was posting on her homepage. She was new to Facebook and the group, but I still figured that was a little strange. I mean, it only took a few days for me to be introduced to all of the other members of the group. I thought it was a shame, as she was a really cheerful person. She would probably get along quite well with all of the others, if given the opportunity. Maybe she didn't have the chance because she was so busy talking with me. Anyway, every day I got home, I'd perform my daily routine. I'd jump in the bath, crack open a beer, and sit in front of my computer talking to May. I would type, "I'm back," and as soon as I did, she would reply,
"Welcome home, Masato. Hope you had a nice day at work."
I felt as if May was my girlfriend. After a little while, I decided to contact my old friends on the channel. "Hi guys, I want to speak to you about May. She seems to be isolated in our group. Do you guys think you could talk to her as well? She says that she wants to get to know more members." I waited, but there was no reply. 5 minutes passed, 20 minutes, 2 hours, but still no reply. I tried contacting a few others, but no one replied to me. I was pissed off. Why were they ignoring me? I scrolled through the public chat histories to see when the last time they were on the group page was, but as I scrolled further and further up, there was no sign of their presence anywhere. Eventually, I realized my original friends that invited me onto the group were no longer using the page at all. A few days passed, and finally I got a reply from one of the people I contacted.
"Hey man, I know you're friendly with that May girl, so I'm sorry for saying this, but you should stay away from her. Don't give her your real address or phone number, and whatever you do, don't try to meet her in real life."
What the fuck is this guy talking about? Hey, are you jealous or something, dude?
Look, just take it from me. That girl is bad news. Just keep it to talking to her online and don't get too close to her.
Why? What's your problem with her? Beyond my annoyance, I felt depressed. It had been a while since I'd made any friends, and they turn out to be the same kind of judgmental assholes I have to interact with at work. After an hour, I received a reply.
You know it's not just me who doesn't talk to her. Everybody doesn't. There's a reason for that. That group page is actually a new group we made after getting rid of the first one. The group name was different and I met all the creators of the new group from there. Not long after creating that first group, that girl May joined. You know, we thought the more members the merrier. So like you, we chatted to her normally, and it wasn't a problem. At first.
He went on to tell me about how this May girl had joined their old Facebook group and grew close to one of the old members, a guy called Noboru. They became so friendly online, in fact, that the two of them decided to meet up in real life, and quickly became intimate. Okay, whatever, I thought. Nothing strange so far. I continued to read.
One day, I received a private message from the guy who had met up with May. It just said, "Help." I guessed he was joking or something, so I didn't take it seriously. I just replied, "Ha ha, what's up, dude?" Immediately, I got a reply. It said, "I don't know what to do. Fuck, I don't know where I am. Help." I was talking to the rest of the group later that day, and apparently a few people had received the same kind of messages from him. We all tried to contact him over and over again, but we never got a reply. Then, after a week, he just suddenly left the group. I went to his Facebook page, but he no longer had a Facebook page either. I think he must have deleted it.
He said that there were literally hundreds of messages from her, demanding to know where Noboru was.
Anyone know where he is? I went to his house, but he wasn't there. I'm calling him, but getting no replies. Someone please tell me where he is.
Due to work obligations, the other members of the group didn't even see the messages at first. Reading through them later, they noticed that the messages became more and more extreme.
I know one of you are hiding him. Fuck you. I'll find him if it's the last thing I do. I love him. I'll kill you all along with him if you don't hand him over.
Apparently, since no one was replying to her, she left the group, to the relief of all of the other members. They all unfriended her, and thought that was the end of it. That's when they set up the new private Facebook group, just to be on the safe side. After a couple of years, they again set the group to public, and apparently a few days after that, I happened to join. Not too long after is when they all received the notification, "May has joined your group." His message concluded.
She had a different surname this time, but I knew it was her. The way she talked, the things she liked, were the same as the previous May. I don't know what happened to the guy, but some sinister shit must have happened. I mean, who just closes their Facebook account without saying anything?
This was all fucking ridiculous. True, that story about May was terrifying, but there was no proper evidence to suggest that the May I was friends with was the same May. He even admitted that she looked different in the pictures now, but remained adamant that he thought it was still her. But the May I knew was lovely, and there's plenty of people with her name in Japan. And so what if their writing is similar? Most girls I know write in roughly the same way, and lots of them have similar interests as well. You can't say they're the same person just because of that. That Facebook group was made for people living in the same town anyway, so it made sense that there was a lot of similarities between the members of the page. These were all of the things I was telling myself at the time. I just replied, "All right, mate. I don't think this is the same girl, though." It was late autumn, early winter, and I'd actually made plans to meet up with May. We'd decided to meet up at a bar in town. I'd been there a couple of times before, and she said that she liked the place too, so we figured it would be a perfect place for us to meet up. I'm not sure if it was due to the prospect of finally meeting her, but I worked harder than usual at work on the day of the meetup. I left at 5 PM on the dot. Once I got home, I washed myself, brushed my teeth, put on my best set of smart casual clothing, and then skipped down to the bar. It was very cold that day, and it had been snowing on and off. I didn't want to keep her waiting in the cold, so I decided to leave on the early side. I got to the bar 20 minutes early, but already there was someone waiting for me just outside. May?" I asked, slightly embarrassed. It was dark, and she was looking down at her phone, so I couldn't see her face. She looked up at me.
Masato? Hey!
She was stunning. Her black hair had grown out slightly longer than in her profile picture, and now reached down past her shoulders. When she looked up, her dark eyes sent my heart fluttering, and instinctively I looked away. Suddenly nervous, I replied, yeah, I hope I didn't make you wait." She timidly smiled.
No, I've only just arrived. Do you want to go inside? It's quite cold out here.
We sat down at the counter and ordered some drinks. Although I was nervous at first, it soon became clear that this was the exact same May I knew from online. After only a few minutes, we were laughing together and talking naturally, just as we did on the net. We talked well into the night, and before we even knew it, the barman announced that the bar was closing. We stepped outside into the freezing cold. Since entering the bar, it had started to snow again. May leaned on my shoulder.
I think I've had too much to drink.
My heartbeat suddenly sped up. Be cool, I told myself. Do you want to rest at mine? It's pretty close. I could hear my heart pounding.
Can I?
Yeah, that's fine. No trouble at all. Have a glass of water and a little rest. She stopped leaning on me and got to her feet.
Okay, let's go.
We held hands and slowly stumbled back to my place. We had sex. She lay next to me with a peaceful face. I looked at her, and once again, I was astounded by how beautiful she was. I just couldn't believe my luck. The next morning we exchanged phone numbers, and she went back to her home. After meeting May, I started going on Facebook less and less. If I wanted to talk with her, I'd just call her up or text her. I also hardly said anything on the Facebook group anymore. I received messages from my friend, but I didn't bother replying to him. Every Friday before the weekend, May and I would meet up, and she would stay around mine. If she was free for the whole weekend, she'd stay around my place on Saturday, and would make me breakfast in the morning. She even helped me clean up my house. Honestly, I can't remember enjoying life as much as I was enjoying it then. May was literally perfect in every single way. Her only fault was that she would get agitated quite quickly when I wouldn't respond to her messages straight away. She'd send me messages like,
Are you busy? What happened? Do you not like me? Sorry, it's annoying for you if I keep sending messages, isn't it? I'll be waiting for you.
If I left my phone for more than an hour, I'd have received at least 20 or 30 messages from her. It had been roughly 2 months since I had first met May in person. During the end of the year, work tended to get busy, and I had a lot of stuff I had to get done before the holidays started. I couldn't even take a lunch break, and I'd have to do overtime practically every single day. In fact, it had been a while since I had last been able to meet May. I began to sense that something was the matter with her. Actually, no. Deep down, I think I'd known that for a while. There was just something off about her. I had been having to work without rest that day. When I finally got back home, it was midnight. I sat down and took a look at my phone to find literally hundreds of messages from May. I quickly replied to her and explained I'd been busy at work.
Thank God. I thought you must not like me anymore. I'm really sorry for bothering you with so many messages.
She was the same May as usual, but I noticed something strange. She'd been sending me messages every 3 minutes. But how could she do that? She worked during the day as well, after all. It was nearing the end of the year, too. All firms were extremely busy this time of year. If May did have a full-time job, such a feat would be impossible. I sent her a message. Won't you get in trouble sending me messages during work? Again, literally seconds after I sent my message, I got a reply.
It's okay. The place I work at isn't busy at all.
Could that be true? I guess if she says so, I'd better believe her. We were a couple after all. I switched my phone off and got into bed. I always had to switch my phone off, otherwise it would be buzzing constantly until the morning. I couldn't help but remember what my friend had told me about the other May. The next day, I got off work at around 11 PM and returned to my house to find May sitting outside of my front door.
Sorry, I couldn't help it. I really want to see you.
I was worried. It was still only Wednesday. This wasn't our normal routine. We should both have work tomorrow morning.
Sorry, is it a bother?
No. It's okay, but...
Thank God. I've decided to stay here tonight. I'll head straight down from here to work.
Now, I noticed she had a rucksack with her. It probably had her work clothes in it. She's gotta be kidding. I've got a really important meeting tomorrow. In the end, I just let her into the house without putting up much of a fuss. I told her I needed to sleep, but she didn't listen to me. She had other plans in mind. By the time we'd finished, or more accurately she'd finished, it was around 2 o'clock in the morning. I didn't even have the strength to lift my cup of coffee the next morning. I somehow managed to get up and dragged myself to work. I messed up my morning meeting. I was so tired due to the previous night, and all of the late nights doing overtime leading up to it. I couldn't remember half of my speech, and my boss scolded me, telling me I'd be demoted if this shit happened again. After the scolding, I went to the toilet to check my phone. I had 86 messages and 18 voicemail recordings, when it had only been 4 hours since I'd last seen May. I made up my mind. The next day, May was waiting for me at my doorstep again. I led her inside, made her a cup of green tea, and looked her straight in the eyes. "Sorry, May, we can't be together anymore." She looked at me dumbfounded.
We're so good together. It's okay. I understand. You're having a hard time with work, aren't you? It's okay. We'll just see each other when the holidays start. I'll be good and wait for you.
I turned away. I couldn't even bear to look at her anymore. I'd heard the same thing a million times from her, and I didn't believe her at all. "I'm sorry, but I've made up my mind. It's over. Pack up your things and leave. I don't want to see you anymore."
I get it. You're tired. It's okay. I'll go home now. We'll see each other again in a few days.
I realized at that point I was almost shouting, but May just didn't seem to understand anything I was saying. She just smiled. I could tell from her voice that she wasn't fazed at all. She really meant what she was saying. I remembered my friend's warning again. Don't get too close to May. After that, I ignored all of May's messages. Every time she'd call me, I'd block her calls. A week passed. Ignoring her messages had been a success. She'd stopped messaging me altogether now, and since that night, she hadn't shown her face around my place. Everything had worked out. I didn't feel like doing anything for the next few days. I opened up a bottle of wine, watched some TV, and then got into my bed. Before midnight, I was fast asleep. It was the middle of the night. I heard something.
Mass.
What was that sound?
Misato.
I thought I was dreaming at first, but slowly it became apparent that I was not alone in my room. I sat up in my bed. There was a silhouette of a person in my doorway. My eyes were still adjusting to the low light, but I could tell it was May by the tone of her voice and the outline of her figure. It didn't take me long to notice the knife in her hand. She must have got it from my kitchen. She was mumbling something about betrayal, and how, if she couldn't have me, nobody could. Honestly, what she was saying was mostly unintelligible. With every wipe of my eyes to clear the sleep from them, I realized she was getting closer and closer to me. It's strange. I wasn't scared, perhaps because I was dazed and confused from being awoken in the middle of the night. Everything was very automatic. I ejected myself from the bed, and I rushed at her, slamming the full weight of my body into her. She went flying downwards, smashing into a set of drawers. I remember thinking that she smacked into the furniture at such a force that she just might have broken her neck. That turned out not to be the case. Either way, my only thought was of escape. I was outside in the freezing cold within seconds, wearing nothing but my underwear. I ran to my neighbor's house and knocked on the door frantically, continually checking over my shoulder to make sure she wasn't behind me. Looking down at the ground, I noticed specks of red in the snow at my feet. Because of the adrenaline in my system, I hadn't noticed that she had slashed my arm deeply during our collision. The folks next door eventually opened up and allowed me to use their phone to call the cops. Had they not recognized me, they would most likely have ignored me, thinking I was some crazy midnight streaker weirdo. When the police arrived, May was no longer in the house. She had fled, taking my diary, computer, and phone with her. I was taken to the hospital, where they stitched my arm up. It took a while, but eventually they tracked her down. It's been 3 years since that night, and still nobody has heard from the previous guy who vanished. I'm certain that she had a hand in his disappearance. I truly believe she paid him a similar visit to me, but that he happened to be a much heavier sleeper than I was. She played dumb about the whole thing though. I see people upload all kinds of things on social media sites nowadays, but just remember that there are some psychos out there in the real world. When I was about 7 or 8 years old, there was this creek in the middle of a forest behind my house that I used to play at all the time. One side of the creek was bordered by a dirt wall about 5 feet high. I used to jump over the creek from one side to the other, and it was fun to pretend I knew parkour. Then, one day, I went out to the creek, and lying in the middle of it was a brand new football. Now, I want to mention an important detail. The creek's depth made it so that the top half of the football stuck out of the water. The top half was completely dry, so it wasn't like the ball was just rolled into the creek. It was placed there. Written on the top of the football in black permanent marker were the words, "Johnny jumps," and underneath that phrase was a phone number. Now this is weird because my name is Johnny. I picked up the football and went home, obviously very confused and kind of scared. Whoever put that ball there had been watching me. They placed it directly where I would jump over the creek when I played by myself. I grabbed the cordless phone and I called the number. It was the number to Homeland Security. Yeah, fucking Homeland Security. The fucking number you call when you think a terrorist attack is about to go down. It was basically Super 911, especially seeing as this was only a few years after 9/11. I quickly tried to explain my situation to the lady on the phone, and she told me it was okay, and to not call the number again. I instantly ran and told my mum what had just happened, and she was just as confused as I was. My parents are divorced, but when my dad came over later that evening to drop something off, I told him what happened as well. He asked me to give him the football, and he said he was going to look into it. I gave it to him, and he left a few minutes later. I kept asking him if he ever figured anything out, and he would give me vague answers or try and dodge the question altogether. This turned into a few weeks of me asking, which then turned into a few months. Then he started acting like he didn't know what I was talking about. That was about 10 years ago, and if I ask him about it now, he says that he has zero memory of this ever happening. He doesn't remember the football at all. My mum does, but only vaguely. To this day, I have absolutely zero idea who was watching me, why they put the football in the creek, why they wrote "Johnny jumps" on it, and I especially have no fucking idea why they put the number to Homeland Security on the ball. I never really thought too much about this incident until I was older, when I realized how fucking creepy this whole thing was. I continued to live by that creek for a few more years, and continued to play and jump over the creek until I moved away. There were no teenagers in my neighborhood. I was the oldest kid. All of my neighbors were very friendly, and I knew them all personally. None of them were ever creepy to me, and nothing else strange ever happened in the 12 years I lived there. I'm a member of the slam poetry scene. Basically, it's an excuse to get people to listen to performance poetry. After running through the small scene in my city, I wanted to branch out and push my career further, so I started to visit places within driving distance where I could spit. This led me to Charlotte, North Carolina. I started at their local team venue, where you compete to be a part of a squad that goes to national competitions every year. I was doing well, and was accepted into the local crew pretty readily. This led to longer stays and features at other venues around the city. I started going to one that was particularly popular, and good for selling CDs. That's where I met him. He worked as a barback, occasionally got on stage and shared, frankly, shitty poems. He was the brother of the host, and everyone knew and liked him. He slowly started flirting with me more and more. Although this was back in my loose days, something always kept me leery. We'd always hang around at parties and events, but I always had this tickle in my gut, warning me not to ever get too close to him. But over a year or two, we continued to become friends. After a while, he started calling and texting me more often, poking me on Facebook daily, sending messages about wanting me to be more than friends with him, and how he wanted a snow bunny. Yes, I'm white and he's black. Again, I never entertained it. There was something gnawing at me. The crazy in his eyes was too hard to miss. I eventually moved to Denver, where I took a position teaching poetry and working at a friend's law firm at the same time. The second Christmas I was there, I got the call. A friend from Charlotte relayed the following. He had indeed found his snow bunny, and they got married. They seemed happy at first, but slowly began fighting more and more. It spilled over into the venue, and often they had to be separated by their friends from physically attacking one another. One friend, later thinking back, remembers the last time she saw them together. Him pushing his wife, followed by her throwing a drink in his face and scratching his neck deep enough to draw blood. She told me that after the couple had been dragged away from each other, she sat with him and smoked a cigarette. She told me that she laughed and said, "You guys are gonna kill each other one day." Around Christmas last year, his wife just stopped coming to the bi-weekly events they both attended regularly. He explained it away that they were on a break. Time goes by. No one really questions that they haven't seen or heard from her in a while, thinking she was breaking from the whole scene in order to put distance between herself and her husband. Her parents, however, hadn't heard from their daughter since Thanksgiving dinner. They would call him up, and he would say everything was fine and blow them off. This continues until a week after Christmas. Knowing that their daughter would never miss a holiday without at least calling, the parents decide to call the police and send them to the couple's home for a well-body check. The cops arrive. They knock on the door and are let in. They ask him where she is. He replies that she's in the bedroom. He shows them into the room. And there she lay, dead for weeks, rotting in their bed. He even killed her little dog as well. During this whole time, he had been attending events, hosting hip-hop nights, even publishing a blog on how to make a marriage work. Never once letting on that every night he was going home and sleeping with his murdered wife. The sickest part of this whole thing is that he has a child from another relationship, a daughter who he gets to celebrate every other holiday with. That Christmas, they opened gifts, had dinner, cuddled up on the couch and watched TV, less than 100 feet away from her decaying stepmother. I don't know what would have happened if I ever took him up on his offer to date, but I do know that me and my gut will always stay on speaking terms, and I will always, always listen. This is a story I heard from a Yakuza member who I was friendly with back in the day. Apparently, he used to hang around with another young Japanese Yakuza member. Basically, they spent their time going around town, finding women to hit on and take them back home. The only problem was they were very forceful, and used hard drugs and aphrodisiacs to make the woman more obedient. So, one day, as usual, the two of them planned to go on an expedition, let's say. But due to sickness, my old friend decided to stay behind, and the young Yakuza went on without him. Apparently, he was successful in catching quite the looker. Once he managed to persuade her to go back to the hotel with him, he pinned the poor woman down and injected her with drugs. Only problem was, the woman died as a result of the drugs. There's no particular clear reason why she died. Maybe she died from an overdose, maybe she just had a bad reaction with one of the chemicals. it didn't matter. Terrified of a police investigation, the young Yakuza went crying to his boss and asked him what to do. This wasn't a common occurrence, but not an unusual event in the Yakuza world. So the boss told him if he brought the body over to the office, he'd take care of it from there. Relieved, the young Yakuza explained the situation and forced my ill friend over. They both somehow dragged the body out of the room without being seen, threw it into the car, and drove down to the Yakuza office building at full speed. But this is when the trouble started. When they showed the body to the Yakuza boss, his face froze over. There was no way for them to know, but the woman in the bag was actually a relative of a general in another Yakuza group. If this body was found, the residual of drugs left inside would lead straight back to their Yakuza group. There could even be an outright gang war. So, although it was roughly 2 o'clock in the morning at this point, the Yakuza boss called a few other Yakuza members. Along with him and his friend, they drove deep into the mountains to dispose of the body. What preceded was hours and hours of digging. They had to make sure that the hole was so deep that there was no way the body could ever be found. Once they'd finished digging, it was around 5 o'clock in the morning, and the sun was starting to rise. Exhausted, his friend dumped the body into the hole and was just about to start covering it up, when, suddenly, the other Yakuza members surrounded him and tied his legs and arms up with duct tape so he couldn't move. Being tired from all of the digging and completely outnumbered, he wasn't able to fight back at all. My friend knew this was going to happen. He'd been tipped off by the boss and was expected to help. You see, they drove down to the mountains for 2 reasons. One was to dispose of the body, and the other was to get rid of the culprit of the murder. His friend hopelessly thrashed around to no avail. The Yakuza members picked him up and dropped him into the hole next to the body. They proceeded to fill up the hole and buried his friend alive. My dad grew up in rural farm country and had to walk about half a mile to and from a bus stop each day. He was the youngest of 5, and he was in his last year of elementary school, while his siblings were in either middle or high school. This meant he went to the same bus stop as his siblings, but they were picked up and dropped off by the bus at different times. My grandma was a single mum who worked as a nurse and couldn't pick him up, but my aunts and uncles usually took good care of him. There was rarely trouble in my dad's county, besides small things like teens taking tractors out for joyrides. One day, when he was walking home on a stretch of country road on my family's property, he saw a van whiz by him. My grandma's family often let locals drive through as a sort of shortcut, so my dad wasn't too alarmed. That all changed when he realized that the van had pulled in a ways up the road. My dad looked inside the van as he passed it and saw a gruff, bug-eyed older man. My dad said the look in his eyes was unsettling, like an excited shark setting sight on its prey. My dad innocently asked, "Mister, what are you doing on our farm?" The old man got out of his car and gave my dad some spiel about how his parents had got into a car crash and my dad needed to go with him to the hospital. Alarm bells went off for one single reason. His parents were divorced, and his dad lived 2 states away. His parents couldn't stand to be around each other, much less in the same car unless it was an absolute necessity. Thinking quick, my dad then asked, "Did you take my brother Ricky there already?" The old man told my dad, "Oh yeah, I picked Ricky up from school and took him right away." My dad didn't have a brother Ricky. He ran towards his house, cutting across the forest. The old man followed behind on foot, yelling at my dad. My dad was just about to give out from exhaustion when he reached the driveway to his house. He saw that his mum wasn't even home and got scared that the man would try to come inside when he saw his Uncle Buck standing on the porch, cleaning his favourite rifle. This struck my dad as odd, because his mum had told him that Uncle Buck had gone on vacation, and my dad hadn't seen him in months. He screamed, "Uncle Buck, that man's trying to get me in his car." Now, Uncle Buck was a scary-looking guy. He was a World War II vet, with Willie Nelson braids and a ZZ Top beard. He was a biker who drank whiskey and smoked cigars, and won plenty of bar fights. Definitely the kind of guy you don't mess with. He didn't say anything as my dad ran inside the house. My dad watched from his bedroom window as Uncle Buck put his rifle together real quick and yelled something at the man. The old man narrowed his eyes, spun around and hightailed it back. It took my dad a few minutes to calm down before he went back down to the porch to talk to Uncle Buck. But when he went there, he couldn't find Uncle Buck anywhere. When his siblings and Mum got home, he told them exactly what happened. According to my dad, his mum went whiter than a sheet and asked him if he was sure that it was Uncle Buck. Well, sure. He was even wearing that motorcycle jacket he got for his birthday. His mum didn't say anything for a few hours. That night, after dinner, my grandmother explained to my dad that Uncle Buck had died in a motorcycle crash a few months earlier in Florida, and that they buried him in those exact clothes. The rifle that my dad had seen him cleaning was kept under lock and key in my grandma's basement. When Uncle Buck died, they couldn't find the keys anywhere, so the case remained locked. When my grandma went to check the case, it was unlocked and unlatched. My father still doesn't know what to make of this, but I've got to thank Uncle Buck for saving my dad's life. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here today. A few years ago now, when my wife was pregnant with our first daughter, she was browsing Craigslist when she came across some maternity clothes for a cheap price. She sent an email to the seller, who went by the name of Jenny, and they agreed to meet at Jenny's place to do the exchange. We were supposed to go and pick up the clothes together, but on the day of the deal, my wife was suffering with some extreme morning sickness. She sent me out to pick up the clothes, and me, not being a complete idiot, asked my pal, Big Bernie, to come along with me. He's 6'4", hence the nickname. I wasn't expecting trouble, but two safer than one, and you can never be too careful. Bernie agrees, and even offers to drive us down in his truck, on the condition that I pay for the gas and a 6-pack of beer. We hit the road at around midday, and it should only be a 30-minute drive. We joke around, sing along to the radio, and discuss future plans. A few minutes from the end of the journey, I notice that the closer we're getting to our destination, the further we're getting from civilization. The turning to the place is coming up on the left, and it's an old run-down farmhouse in essentially the middle of nowhere. Nothing but dirt and brush in either direction for at least half a mile. And even then, the closest buildings are other run-down farmhouses too. Some people would call it horribly isolated, and others would call it paradise. At that moment, we thought it was ominous. As we pull into what I hasten to call a driveway, we both question whether this is really the right house. Bernie double checks on the map to confirm. Sure enough, this is the woman's house. We're not too worried though, since it's still daylight and there are two of us. We exit the vehicle. We're greeted by some heavy-set dude who was waiting on the porch, and he introduces himself as the man of the house. Immediately, I can tell there's something bothering him. He asks me where my wife is, and I tell him that she couldn't make it. He motions for us to come inside, saying that his wife has the clothes ready for us to pick up. My warning signals are starting to blink as we approach the house. This doesn't seem like the sort of place that even has a phone, let alone internet connection to post a Craigslist ad. As we step inside, there's a room off the hallway with some commotion going on inside. Standing in a room completely void of any furniture are about 7 other burly men, just standing around in a sort of semicircle. Now, this is creepy as all hell. What the fuck would all these greasy guys be doing with a bunch of clothes for a pregnant woman? They all turn to look at us as we poke our heads in, all with the same expression on their face. Disappointment. They weren't hillbillies exactly, but they were of a similar breed. Put it this way, you could tell just by looking at them that they were trouble. Every fibre of my being is screaming that we need to get the fuck out of there right away. But social etiquette is a hell of a powerful thing. So when the main guy said to follow him into the kitchen for the clothes, we did. He led us into a decrepit kitchen, again completely empty, other than a few broken down appliances. You got the money? I reply with a yes, but I'm hesitant to get my wallet out in front of this guy. He picks up some dirty rag and extends it out to me, like this is the thing I'm supposed to be buying. No, that's not what we came here for. He stares at me, with some creepy, excited-looking smile on his face, and it becomes obvious that there were never any clothes for sale in the first place. Unsure of how to respond, Bernie takes control and says, "Yeah, hold on, we'll go and get the money." An obvious lie, but good enough that this guy doesn't question us. Instead, he just stands there, with that same damn expression plastered across his ugly face. As we exit the farmhouse, we can see that all of the men who were in the other room are now leaning against Bernie's truck. Some of them are even rummaging through the things he keeps on the back. Now we know for sure that these guys aren't gonna let us go without a fight. Fuck. We're slowly walking back towards the truck, and I'm hoping to God that Bernie's got a plan. He's thinking the same thing I am, and without words, we give each other that universal look of shit. My memory of all of this comes back to me in slow motion. Bernie whispers for me to stay cool and approaches the guys who are rummaging through the truck. We're outnumbered, and for all we know, outgunned, so rather than confront these hillbilly wannabe bastards, Bernie instead tells them about the power tools on the back seat. They start crowding around and digging about back there, proving just the distraction we needed. We both fucking dart into the nearby tree line. Forget the van, forget the tools. We just have to get the hell out of there and away from these creeps. We keep going until we think they're a good distance behind us, and then we lay low for a while, desperately searching for cell phone signal. After a while in the woods, we hear people approaching, and we take cover in the thicket. Bernie arms himself with a rock from the ground, and I follow suit. We're both praying that this isn't the cast of Deliverance descending upon us, but rather some decent folk who just so happen to be out for a walk or something. But as we hear their screeching and hollering, that illusion is shattered. We can't tell how many of them have chased us out this far, but it's clearly them. And what's worse, what really made my blood curdle with unprecedented fear, was the sound of something else that got louder as they got closer. The sound of Bernie's fucking DeWalt power drill, buzzing. One of those battery-powered ones. Now my imagination's kicked into overdrive with what might happen if they catch us, and all we've got to fight them off with is a couple of rocks. We remain silent long after these guys pass us by, just to make sure they were long gone. Eventually we found a signal, and called the police, who take their sweet-ass time to get to the location. When they finally do arrive, The place was empty. All of their vehicles were gone, as were all of Bernie's tools inside of the van, which had taken a beating as well. It still ran though, so we were able to get back home. Thankfully, Bernie kept his hands on the keys. Turns out that building really was abandoned, and not one of those guys lived there. We never heard anything else about it from the cops. What I think is really messed up is that these guys lured us out there with the promise of maternity clothes, meaning that they intentionally wanted their victims to be a couple of prospective parents. I'm thankful every day that my wife didn't come with me. Her pregnant self wouldn't have been able to get away quick enough, and we would have been at the mercy of those guys. There's no way I could have fought them off. Hell, I couldn't even with Big Bernie on my side. My daughter was born shortly after this incident, healthy and beautiful, and thankfully, she won't have to grow up without her father. The sound of power drills still brings back those memories. I met my girlfriend through a friend. They both have family in Utah, and they visit regularly, and whenever they go, they always catch up with a friend of theirs. Let's call him Jones. So, way back when, around 1998-ish, Jones was just a kid. He had a pretty tight curfew, and wasn't allowed to stay up past a certain hour. This was a problem for Jones, since, like many of us, he had a profound love of gaming, which he still has today. One night, Jones sneaks out of his room to play a few rounds of a game before really going to bed. He walks down to the basement where the console was and starts to play. So far, so good. He's just sitting there playing, when he hears a loud thud from one of the basement windows, the kind that are just above ground level. He looks, and he sees a bright red, almost pink hair-covered hand. And then her face pops into view, and it's just plain wrong. Oddly coloured eyes, long misshapen nose, and a too big smile as he described it. Immediately he starts screaming and shouting. After an indeterminate period of time, his father comes down the stairs with a gun in tow, and apparently sees the thing as well. He starts shouting right away, saying he's too young, he doesn't need this yet. The father runs out into the yard and fires a few shots off. 10 years or so go by without incident. Fast forward to around 2008, and the kid, now much closer to a man, is having strange dreams about the same creature. It's sitting on a rafter in his dad's shop, pointing down and grinning like a madman the entire time. He has this same dream for about 3 days, and then suddenly it stops. He gets called out of school one day, and finds out his dad has killed himself, hung from a rafter in his shop. The funeral comes and goes. The family grieves and largely comes to terms, until one day, where Jones is talking with his grandmother. He finds out that the thing that came to him in his dreams is something that all of the men in their family see. Some are strong and don't kill themselves, but others cave and do. She tells him about how it's been something that's been going on in their family for a long time, all the way back to when they first came to America. I don't know what to make of it, but if anyone knows about something similar, I'd love to hear it. This event happened in the spring of 2015. So, I'm a young adult male living in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. I joined a fairly popular BDSM website in January, and was instantly drawn into the community. For those of you who don't know, BDSM is a variety of erotic practices involving bondage, dominance, submission, and masochism. Think 50 Shades of Grey if that helps. The community welcomes all kinks and fetishes alike, and everyone I've ever met from that site has been very welcoming and friendly. Except one. It all started with me coming across her profile. She was a gorgeous woman, very fit, with long legs and firm breasts. She was an older woman, but I was into that. I started by browsing her collection of photos, mostly fairly vanilla images of her sitting at a dining room table drinking a glass of wine and smiling at the camera. Real classy, which only urged me forward. I went ahead and messaged her. I wrote the usual greetings and offered to chat and get to know each other. She replied almost instantly. She greeted me as Sir, given the role I take. We continued to message back and forth for a week or two. She explained to me that she wanted me to be her master, since her last master died in a car accident. This was odd to me, but unfortunate accidents can happen to anyone, right? She continued giving me details of what she wanted me to do to her, and I very much obliged. The next couple of days, we kept trying to meet up for a coffee, but unfortunately, she had to cancel last minute every time. Eventually, I began getting very eager, as all the kinky discussion had gotten me worked up. So, late one night, she messages me, inviting me over to her place. She explained to me that she doesn't work in the morning, so we can be up all night having our fun. Well, being so worked up and not having the necessary blood flowing to my brain to make an educated decision, I agreed and asked for her address. She sent me her address, along with a phone number that she said was her home line, and I got ready to head out. So, I got into my car and I plugged the address into my GPS. This is where I noticed she lived in Hamilton, which is about 45 minutes away from Toronto. It's currently 1 AM, but this didn't bother me as I drove to Hamilton quite often, and considering I was spending the night, I could just leave in the morning. 45 minutes later, I find myself passing Hamilton. Okay, so it's a little further than that, no big deal. But then I reached a stretch of highway void of any streetlights. This is where I start to get concerned, as I only had my own headlights lighting the way. Suddenly, my GPS chimed in with the female voice indicating my exit. It was coming up on the right, and I feared driving into the darkness off the mild comfort of the highway. The exit took me into a long, dark stretch of country road. My warning lights start going off as I pass silhouettes of farmhouses and forestry, a good distance between each of them. My GPS chimed again, indicating that my destination was coming up on my left, but as I approached the location, it's not even close to what I expected. It was a small church house, with one yellow streetlight illuminating the dirt lot in front of it. I pulled into the lot and took a closer look, with my vehicle's headlights pointed at the building. The windows and door were boarded up, and definitely not recently, as the wood seemed weather-worn. My blood began to run cold as I made sure my doors were locked and my windows rolled up. The full tank of gas gave me some kind of comfort in this situation. I figured she possibly made an error while typing out the address and called the number she gave me. The number you are trying to reach is no longer in service. Okay, at this point I'm ready to turn and leave, until I notice my phone alerting me that I have an email. It was a message from her. Hey, I see you're here. It's not the church. My place is the small house behind the church. All I could do was replay all of the horror movies I've seen in my life in my head, and I just couldn't believe I could possibly be living one out in real life. However, a small jolt of curiosity persuaded me forward, even if to just take a look at this house. There was a small path beside the church, and I slowly pulled into it. As I crept my car forward, a small little farmhouse poked itself out of the trees at the top of the hill. At this point, I'm certain I'm not going in there. I've made the decision in my head that my own survival took precedent over the need for sex. I was about to reverse out of there, until I saw the upstairs balcony door open. A hooded figure stepped out. I couldn't see their face, but I could tell by the posture and shape that it was a man. Despite the darkness of his facial features, I could feel that he was looking directly at me. He stood there for about 30 seconds before he motioned his head in a way I recognized as the universal signal for "look behind you." Just then, I felt the metal handle on the outside of my driver door being tugged at. I quickly turned my head in that direction to see the woman from the profile photos, hunched over and pressing her face up against the window. My heart leapt out of my chest as I stared at her horrifying smile. The best way I can describe her expression would be any creepy cartoon image of the Joker you've ever seen. It was undoubtedly her behind that insane grin, only much older. She whispered through the glass, "Open the door, baby." I was frozen in my seat, unsure of how to respond, or even what to do next. So I just sat there, continuing to stare at her like an idiot. Her face then quickly fell into an angry, malicious expression, as she continued to violently jiggle at the door handle. She then yelled at the top of her lungs, "Open this door, now." This knocked me into panic mode, and I pressed my foot to the gas, my car set to reverse. The woman tried holding onto the car handle, only to let go shortly after being dragged off her feet. I flew down the dark road towards the highway, almost triple the speed limit, just in case they had a car themselves, and decided to chase me. I called up a friend of mine who I also met on the same website. She lived in Hamilton, and insisted I come over and stay the night. When I got there, she poured me a cold glass of Coke Zero, as I explained what happened. She told me that she read in a local paper about an older couple who lured men out to their farm. I stopped her right there, as I didn't want to be more freaked out than I was already. I'm an Ojibwe native, enrolled in the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe, located in northern Minnesota. We Ojibways have a ceremony called Midawewin. This ceremony is generally used as a healing process. It's a sacred ceremony that us Midwesterners take very seriously. Around 2 years ago, during the summer of 2013, I accompanied my cousin to the ceremony, which was held on my reservation. After a lengthy drive from the cities, I arrived at this strange destination that wasn't on the map. This area had a small lake, which I later learned didn't have a name. Anyway, I met with my cousin, and I spent the next 5 days with him as he prepared for his turn to be healed. We met many others that were seeking the ceremony's healing properties as well. Traditionally, you're not supposed to tell anybody what you're going through the ceremony for. So, I spent the next 5 days here at this remote place, where they didn't allow any technology of any sort. We lived like our ancestors did. As such, we didn't have the luxury of any showers, but nobody at the ceremony liked being sweaty and dirty all day. We all pitched in for a room at a nearby casino, so we could all take a shower. On my second night at the ceremony grounds, we were all gathered around a large bonfire before heading off to sleep. During our time at the campfire, the ceremony guide asked us if we could hear the coyotes. To be honest, I did. They were crazy loud, the loudest I'd ever heard them. We all agreed that we had heard them, and he proceeded to tell us that ever since one person started the ceremony, the coyotes have been going wild every night. Anyhow, we used the shower room at the casino frequently. We always went in pairs, and it was a young girl's turn, and she went with her mother. We'll call this young girl Mary. Mary had apparently joined the ceremony to get rid of an evil spirit that had been following her, and scratching her arms during the night. It sounds crazy, but be prepared for what you're about to hear next. These words come from the mouth of Mary's mother. I woke up Mary at around 9 p.m, and we drove to the room to shower. I showered first, and Mary waited out in the room, watching TV. after my shower, it was Mary's turn. Everything was going good, until she screamed a blood-curdling scream, and the door slammed and locked. Mary was screaming so loud, and I was screaming and freaking out myself. I couldn't open the door to save my baby, so I got on my knees, and I looked under the crack of the door, and I saw 2 feet. I was certain they weren't Mary's, because I could hear her screams coming from further away in the shower. I screamed for whatever it was to leave her alone. All of a sudden, Mary stopped screaming. I was able to open the door now, and Mary was in there, sitting in the shower as if nothing had happened. I hugged my baby, and we left right away. We rushed back to the ceremony grounds. I remember when Mary and her mother came. It was late at night, maybe 10 or 10:30 p.m. I awoke to the sounds of the mother crying, and it was extremely surreal and unsettling. We got together, offered tobacco, and made use of the 4 medicines. An emergency ceremony proceeded. That lasted 2 hours. By the end of it, little Mary was asleep, and we were all exhausted. As I lie in my bed, mortified at what the mother told me earlier, I didn't sleep at all. The next day, I noticed something. The coyote calls were gone. Coincidence? Maybe. Mary had no memory of her spirit. Her family described it as an elderly woman, and often viewed it trailing Mary. On Mary's last ceremony day, the ceremony guide told us that he had done some deep research and brainstorming. He believes that because of Mary's mother's tribal affiliation with the Dakota Sioux, it upset her daughter's elder spirit. Mary was accepted into Mille Lacs because she was just over the 25% blood quantum requirements. The evil spirit was angered that young Mary was in the wrong tribe and didn't accept it. Hundreds of years ago, the Dakota and the Ojibwe were bitter enemies. To this day, as far as I know, Mary is living a happy life with no memory of her evil encounter. She seceded from the Ojibwe tribe and was accepted into her mother's tribe. Oh, and the unnamed lake that I mentioned earlier? It's now known as the Devil's Call. This is the scariest episode from my childhood. It took place in 1991, when I was 8 years old. I lived in a village on the Norwegian countryside, with my parents and 2 older brothers. There weren't many kids around for us to play with, so we always stuck together, despite the age gaps. I was 8 and my brothers were 10 and 12. It was a safe neighborhood, and we were outdoorsy kids. It was fine for us to just return home to eat and then go back out and play in the woods or go fishing in the nearby lake. In the autumn of 1991, my oldest brother dared us to sneak into an abandoned property that was located nearby. We had always thought of it as a haunted house, but really it was just an old house where the man who started the village brick factory once lived. No one had lived there for ages, and the paint was starting to peel off, and several windows were broken. Our parents would tell us to never go there. Their reason was, of course, that they feared we would get hurt playing there, but we thought it was because it was haunted. But that day, we dared to walk around in the garden. It had a now dried up pond, an old well, several old and dying fruit trees, and even tools in an old shed. It looked as if someone had just walked out one day and never bothered to return, leaving everything as it was. We soon came to think of the garden as our own, and played there all the time. We climbed the trees, used the tools to build things, and generally had a great time. Our very own secret playground. We suspected that people in the village had seen us, because soon our parents would ask us if we had gone there despite being strictly forbidden, which of course we denied, but someone must have complained. This incident happened one day in November. I remember as it was the day before my birthday. It was a damp and rainy day, and we weren't really in the mood for playing outside. But our mum had chased us out of the house so she could clean in peace, and we weren't allowed back until an hour later. So, we decided to try and open the old cellar in the abandoned house. I'm not sure what the word is in English, but imagine, if you will, a hatch that opens almost horizontally to the ground, then a few steps that lead you down into a digged-out cellar with stone walls and earth floor. It was used to store vegetables and such, but now was empty. All of us climbed down to have a look. The plan was to write our names on the inside of the cellar, sort of to make it as our own kind of thing. Suddenly, the hatch is slammed shut above us, and the cellar became completely dark. I started screaming, and my older brothers try and open the hatch. When my oldest brother, Sindre, pushed the hatch open, he saw a man's hand holding an axe. "Come on out, you trespassing little brats." Sindre shouted back, "Hell no," and slammed the hatch shut from the inside. "I know you're all in there, you little shits. Do Mummy and Daddy know where you are? Do they? I bet they don't." We heard him drop the axe and start to move around with something else. Soon we realized that he had taken out a hammer, and before we knew it, he had started to nail the hatch closed. I threw myself at the hatch, determined to get out, but the moment the hatch was open just a little bit, he reached for the axe. "Come on out. It's the better choice, really." He laughed, and we could hear that he was clearly drunk. My other brother, Emil, was pleading with the man to let us go, promising that we'd never return, but his words fell on deaf ears. The rain had started to fall really heavily now. The drunk man with the hammer was cursing and moving around outside, clearly bothered by the bad weather. "I might come back and let you out one day, or I might just butcher all three of you." He continued hammering the hatch shut. We were too terrified to do anything, but Sindre told us to keep calm and it would be okay. Surely this guy was just trying to scare us. The dark was compact inside the cellar, and it was cold and damp. After a long while of silence from the man outside, we started wondering if he had left. Sindre decided that we should count to 100 and then try to get out. We counted aloud, and then used our hands to find the hatch. It was definitely nailed shut. Sindre told us to feel the stone walls and search for a loose stone we could use. Eventually, we found one, and it was surprisingly easy to remove from its place. The cellar was old, and had not been tended to for ages, and the rainy climate of the Norwegian coastside had left the wooden hatch doors rather soft with age. The hardest thing was to reach up, since the cellar was built in such a way that it was impossible to get a good forward motion going in order to break the wood. But, fueled by panic and adrenaline, we broke the lower half open. Being lower to the ground, it was softer and easier to tear apart. We started digging the earth with our hands, creating a small opening out. Being the smallest, my brothers pushed me out of the cellar, and I could see that the man was indeed gone. My brothers were too big to fit out of the small opening, and Sindre said I would have to find the hammer and get the hatch open. I was absolutely petrified that the man would come back with the axe, and I would have to run, leaving my brothers to die or stay behind and be slaughtered. At 8 years old, I had no doubt that would have happened. I got the hammer, but I couldn't get the nails out, so I used the hammer to simply break the hatch into pieces. Soon we were all running for our lives across the garden. When we finally got home, our mum threw a fit over the state of our clothes and demanded to know what we had been up to. Unsure of what to say, we simply said nothing. We never went back there again. Hell, we never even looked that way. The man with the axe? We still have no idea who he was or where he came from. I sometimes wonder if he was a drifter, living in that abandoned house, not wanting noisy kids to disturb the peace. We never told anybody about it, but every year, when Sindre, Emil and I reunite at the family home for Christmas, we like to ask if there's been any news about the old ghost house down the street. Did anyone move in there yet? About 12 years ago, when I was a teenager, I met two girls. Their names were Michelle and Anna. I met Michelle first, and was introduced to Anna through her. We spent a massive amount of time together over the course of several years. Anna and I were actually dating for the majority of that period, and I still have tons of pictures and online chat logs to prove it. Eventually, college came up. Anna moved away, and we split completely amicably. Michelle left for college not long afterwards, but things between us were also amicable. We gradually just lost touch. I hadn't really thought about them for a long time, but I ran into Michelle a couple of years ago. I said hello, but she seemed to have absolutely no idea who I was. I told her my name, and she just stared at me completely dumbfounded. At first, I thought maybe I had misidentified her, so I asked if she was Michelle Jones, who went to so-and-so high school and had been friends with Anna. She stated that she was, but still seemed incredibly confused. I told her a few other things in an effort to jog her memory, but her expression gradually changed of one to absolute terror. She became angry and started yelling, "Who the fuck are you? Get away from me!" With no other options, I left. The meeting with Michelle had really freaked me out. I considered that maybe she had suffered a head injury, or something of that sort, but I decided to look up Anna online. I found her, living out of state, and I sent her an email. She verified who she was, but also seemed to have absolutely no recollection of me. I gave her my phone number and I asked her to call. She did. I tried to make her remember, but she continued acting clueless. I mentioned that I had dated her for almost 3 years, but she just laughed at me. "That's ridiculous," she said. "I was dating Mike through most of high school." Who the fuck is Mike, I wondered. She accused me of trying to play a trick on her, and she hung up. The whole situation bothered me for a while, but I managed to let it go. Then, a few months ago, I started going through some CDR backups I had made of old computer data. On one disk were audio recordings from early 2002, recordings I created by recording my answering machine message into a computer microphone. That might sound weird, but I'm autistic. I have a definite inclination towards saving and categorizing things that feel important to me. Much of the disk had been corrupted, but 2 of the messages which remained intact were from girls. Judging by the file names, one was named Jessica, and the other was Heather. Both girls declared that they loved me, but I didn't recognize either of their voices. In fact, I hadn't known anyone by those names since grade school. Yesterday, I called up a few people who I'd been friends with back when I was a teen. None of them had any idea who Michelle or Anna were. Neither did they remember Heather, but they all mentioned how I'd spent years absolutely in love with a girl named Jess. Apparently, they had all met her at least briefly. They told me that I wouldn't ever shut up about her, and I was absolutely heartbroken when she broke up with me. Nobody recalled her last name, where she went to school, or any details I could use to find her. They were able to give me a physical description, short and slightly chubby blonde-haired girl, and told me that she had a squeaky, high-pitched voice. The girl in my recording does in fact have a voice that fits that description perfectly. How did I lose Michelle and Anna? How did I gain Jess? Who even is Jess? I have pictures of Anna and myself together, so I know this isn't all in my head. Has anyone else experienced this kind of thing? Oh boy, you guys would love where I work. Weird things happen here all of the time, but I'll just talk about one of the creepiest moments I've ever experienced here. I work as a security nighttime attendant at an apartment building. It's 24 stories, and one of the oldest buildings in the city. One night, I'm sitting here when the phone rings at about 3 AM, and I answer with, "Hello, this is Sam at the front desk. How can I help you?" The voice on the other end sounded female, but was totally garbled, and the only bit I could make out was 23rd floor. I tried to tell the person that I couldn't understand them, and asked what apartment they were in. But again, a garbled response, and 23rd floor. After the third time of trying to understand them and the same response, I said that I couldn't understand them, but that I'd come up and meet them in the hallway. So, I go to the main elevators, and both of them are up on the, surprise, 23rd floor. Luckily, we have an older service elevator, and that one's only on the 7th floor, so I call it down. I get in, and I hit the button for the 23rd floor, but it won't move, and the inner door won't close. So I go to unlock the reset panel, and boom, we start going up, door still open. I'm freaking out, and the elevator is shaking because it goes really fast and is quite old. As I'm going up, I just stay towards the back, and finally, I reach the 23rd. I step out, and the door closes just fine. I look around the hallway. There's nobody around. I walk along slowly, trying to listen for anyone awake who might have called, but there's nothing. So now I head the opposite direction, and I go towards where the regular elevators are. And when I get to them, they're just sitting there, with their doors open. I was pretty freaked out, but I knew it could just be the elevators on the fritz. So I get in, and I figure I'll just reset them when I get back to the first floor. That's when I hear the sound of the back stairwell closing. So I quickly get out and I go to the stairwell, and lo and behold, no one's there. But the maintenance door to the machine room is ajar, and at that time, I'm the only one in the building with a key. At the top of the building is a large machine room, housing all of the really loud machinery, and allows access to the roof. I don't like going into it, because it's creepy as fuck, and no one ever goes in there. So at this point, I'm seriously freaked out, but I muster up, and I head in. I shout hello, and there's no response. The lights in this room are the shitty fluorescent ones, so I can't see well either. But at the end of the room, I can make out the roof access door, and sure as shit, it's slightly open. So I slowly continue forward, checking the space in between each machine as I walk by, and there's no one there, so I open the roof access door. I can't see anyone ahead of me on the roof, but there's a slight wraparound, and if there was a jumper or something, I needed to be sure, so I step out, and I leave the door like it was. Almost immediately, the door is pulled shut. Now, I might have written this off as the wind or something, but this door is hard to shut, and hard to open. I mean really hard. I immediately grab the handle and yank it open, slam it behind me, and run straight for the maintenance room. It automatically locks when it's closed, so I slam it shut too, and I go back to the 23rd floor hallway. I get into the elevator, for which the doors are still open, and I go all the way down to the first floor. I go back to the main lobby, and as soon as I sit down, the phone rings. I pick it up, and I don't say a word. And sure as hell, a garbled voice again, only audibly saying, 23rd floor. I hung up the phone, turned the ringer off, and I spent the rest of the evening just staring at the parking garage security monitor. There's been a bunch of creepy things happen in this building. It's basically the Overlook Hotel at night. I walked past a dark room here on the first floor once, and swore I saw myself standing inside it. The next night, as I'm inside said room cleaning, the lights flip off, and I turn around to see a quick flash of myself walking past. I don't know if this is a glitch or paranormal, but it's creepy as all hell. Having spent my entire life living in New Mexico, a lot of people I know have claimed to have seen skinwalkers. For those of you who don't know what they are, you'll get the gist from this story. They're kind of our regional boogeyman, but ask a Navajo about them, and they'll either absolutely ignore the question, or they'll kind of laugh it off, saying something to the effect of, "White people believe that they're myths." Well, this is my story regarding them. My father owns a small delivery service that operates out of Farmington. We mostly deliver small packages out to the middle of nowhere that are too much hassle for the larger delivery companies to bother with. My dad is the only employee, and we have a few pickup trucks and a trailer. One day, we get a delivery out to Window Rock, Arizona, on the Navajo reservation around 2 hours from Farmington. My dad gets the call for the job while he's chilling with his Navajo friend, Travis, and his girlfriend as well. Travis mentions how he's got family out in Window Rock that he hasn't seen in ages, and makes the suggestion that they should go with him. I was about 6 or 7 at the time, and it was summer, so my dad decides we'll all go down together. He can make his delivery real quick, and then, while Travis sees his family, we can go and check out Window Rock. It's a big rock face with a large hole in it that goes right to the other side. Pretty cool. We had to convoy in separate trucks, since my dad's was loaded down with freight. We decided to bring along a couple of walkie-talkies, so that we could communicate with Travis and his girlfriend as we drove. We spend our time in Window Rock. Everything is generally uneventful, and we start heading home along the old highway, with my dad and I in front, and Travis and his girlfriend in the truck behind us. I honestly don't remember most of Window Rock, but this next part, I can never forget. We're somewhere on the highway between Window Rock and Gallup, New Mexico. It had just rained earlier in the day, and the road was kind of slick, so we were taking it pretty slow. On the left of the highway there's nothing but sandstone cliffs, and on the right there's a huge field, separated from the road by a small barbed wire fence. We crest the top of the hill, and down at the bottom we see what appears to be a very large dog, sitting back on its haunches in the middle of the road, facing the cliffs. My dad calls over the radio. "Hey Trav, do you see that big ass dog?" Travis starts yelling back over the radio, "That's no dog. Speed up and hit it right now." He just keeps screaming. He sounds almost hysterical. "JJ, you have to hit it. Please, please, hit that fucking thing right now." My dad can hear the fear in his voice, so he starts to speed up, and as we get a bit closer, I begin to see it a little more clearly. It's covered in this brown, wiry, matted fur that appears to have dried blood all over it. It's still facing the cliffs, but the moment our headlights hit it, it turns and looks at us, and it has an almost human face. I don't know how else to describe it. Sort of a mix between a bear and a human face, I suppose. It looks twisted and distorted, and almost in pain. As we get closer to this thing, we start to realize it's actually fucking huge. Though it's still sitting on its haunches, it's about shoulder height with the hood of the truck. We get extremely close to hitting it, when it lets out this scream that sounded like someone screaming as their lungs filled with water, and it rushes backwards towards the field, leaping over the barbed wire fence. Within seconds, it was gone from sight. Travis comes over the radio again. Holy shit. Keep driving. We have to get out of here. We have to drive faster. He kept repeating that last part. Pretty soon, we're speeding like crazy, and just as we start to come near the outskirts of Gallup, we get pulled over. Travis pulls his truck over as well behind us. Naturally, this makes the cop, a Navajo man himself, very on edge, and he immediately asks why Travis felt the need to pull over as well. Travis says, "We just saw a Skinwalker a few miles back, and it's been following us." The officer immediately turns white, stammers something about a verbal warning, gets in his car and takes off. We do the same. We didn't see anything else that night, but when we got home, Travis refused to let us leave without taking some kind of Navajo totem thing with us. Supposedly, it kept the thing away. If any of you guys have had any experiences with Skinwalkers, I'd love to hear them. Let's Not Meet is one of my favourite subreddits, but I've noticed that most of the stories written here happened in the USA. Here is a little taste of horrors that we lived through south of the border, in Mexico. This happened to a friend of my mother's relatives, a family of 4, Arturo, the dad, Maria the mum, Eduardo the son, and Anna, the daughter, who happened to be extremely beautiful. They live in Mexico City, but as is common for upper middle to upper class families, they went to spend a long weekend in Acapulco, a vacation spot that, frankly, has seen better days, as it was overshadowed by Cancun in the 80s. Acapulco had recently been the focus of gang-related warfare, since homegrown gangs refused to cede territory to the powerful Sinaloa cartel. This inconvenience, however, did not completely stop the flow of tourists to this once gorgeous, now decadent port, and did not stop Arturo and his family from going, a decision they would later regret enormously. The family was dining in a restaurant next to the sea, enjoying the delicious seafood, when the waiter, clearly nervous, came to the table with a bottle of expensive champagne and a note. "This is from the gentleman over there," he said, pointing at a table where 4 men sat that you could just tell at first glance were narcos, wearing gold chains, rings and the like, and drinking Johnny Walker Blue Label. Arturo unfolded the note and read, "This is for you to have a toast with your daughter, as this is the last night you will ever see her." Arturo got up, left 1,000 pesos on the table for the meal, and they went straight back to the hotel where, in terror, they made their bags and prepared to leave immediately. Along the way to Mexico City, there are several desolate stretches where all you can see is desert, and perhaps some misshapen little houses and a gas station. Arturo stopped the car at one of those gas stations to fill up. As he was filling up, 2 cars suddenly pulled into the gas station, one parking in front and one behind the family's car. They'd been followed. Several men exited the vehicles and pointed their AR-15s at the family. They came to honor their word. They came for Anna. According to Arturo, there are few worse feelings than being powerless as you watch your daughter, screaming and kicking, being dragged into a car, which then speeds away over the horizon, never to be seen again. Unfortunately, most of these incidents go unreported, since the fear of retaliation is too great. Lots of people are afraid of accessing the deep web for themselves, be that because they don't want to see some of the messed up things they've heard about, or because one wrong step can, in theory, land you in a whole heap of trouble. Accidentally clicking on a disguised child porn site, which automatically downloads some illegal images onto your computer, for example. I guess that's why so many people are interested in hearing about the deep web. It's still a pretty big mystery to most internet users, but a pretty interesting one at the same time. I, however, was never too worried about accessing it myself. It's mostly a pretty boring place, and most of the crazy things you hear about are either massive exaggerations or just downright myths. That's not to say there aren't some seriously messed up things out there though. Here's an example of a real site on the deep web, which I came across a while ago now. The site in question was called Acid Splash, followed by a seemingly random assortment of numbers. So something like acid_splash 764390. You get the picture. When following the link to the site, you arrived at a cover page that simply had the site's crude little logo and the slug line, because ugly on the inside should mean ugly on the outside. Clicking on the logo brought you to the main site. Across the top bar were a few links to follow, such as About, Services, Members videos, Pictures, and all the like. Despite the crappy logo on the cover page, this site was pretty well laid out, fairly professional looking for deep web standards. In the About section, it explained that the site was for those with a burning desire for revenge. Basically, it was a site for angry users to get revenge on anyone they liked, in a very particular way. For a price, they'd be able to pick a target to be the victim of an acid attack, ruining their lives forever. They kept on using the word justice, I assume to try and convince users to use their services, and to rationalize their sick business. The attacks would be recorded, and the videos would then be uploaded to the site, where other users who paid a Bitcoin membership fee would be able to view them. At the bottom of the page were several sample videos. Each video was titled a person's name, followed by the word Splash. Cindy Splash, for instance, and had a short description underneath, thanking a username for making use of their service. All of the short sample videos would follow the same formula. They would record themselves stalking the victims, filming them from hidden spots so that the people being taped weren't aware they were being watched. The footage was just of the people going about their everyday lives and just doing normal things. Shopping, hanging out with friends, walking to work, etc. After a few minutes of this, the video would cut to the inside of an empty apartment. All you could see were a person's gloved hands, preparing a beaker of what I assumed to be hydrochloric or sulfuric acid. The end of each video would be of the victim, filmed from a distance, as the cameraman slowly approaches them when they are alone and vulnerable. The camera gets uncomfortably close, and you can see the shock on the person's face as the cameraman shouts something at them, always in a language I didn't understand. The acid would then be thrown in the victim's face, their screams clearly audible, as the guy holding the camera ran from the scene. Even if treated immediately, such an attack would completely destroy a person's face, leaving them with horrific facial burns and scars for the rest of their lives, and potentially even blinding them. Just before fleeing, the camera would linger slightly on the victim's face as they clutched it in agony, the acid slowly burning away at their skin. According to the site's About section, the members' videos put a much larger focus on the stalking aspect, with some of the videos being over an hour long, so that the viewer could get really into the lives of the victims before they were ruined forever. The videos appeared to be from a variety of countries, suggesting that this was either a semi-global organization, or that the people behind the scenes were willing to do a lot of traveling to carry out the attacks. They may have also paid freelance criminals to do the jobs for them and film the attacks. The outcome's all the same. All of the victims in the videos I watched, bar one, were female. I don't know if it's some sort of weird sexual fetish that leads people to support the site, or just a love of watching people suffer. More likely it's a combination of the two. Some sort of sadistic fantasy. Admittedly, I watched all of the free sample clips, out of morbid curiosity I suppose. I'd say there are plenty of normal, well-adjusted people who'd watch this stuff and still condemn it. Look at the amount of people who actively search car crash videos on YouTube. It's hard to look at, but sometimes even harder to look away. I still use the deep web on occasion. It's useful for a few things provided you know where to look, and you quickly learn what links to avoid. But if you go looking for shit like this site, you're bound to stumble across some pretty eye-opening stuff eventually. That much I can tell you.